This is day 7 of the 30-day Excel challenge, and it's our first practice day. So that means we're going to be building a project using some of the topics we've covered throughout the week. So we're going to build a simple expense report that's going to help each department stay within their budgets. But before we get into that, we need to talk about how to actually build a data project. So if you're not sure where to start or how to make a project that's useful for someone else, this part is for you. So there are two types of projects you're probably going to be building. One is going to involve real users. So your end users are real people. So that could be like a marketing team or finance lead or operations manager. And two, it will be simulated users. So that's where you're going to be building for an avatar or a persona you'd probably find in the real world. So you're basically building for an imaginary stakeholder or team that would actually find this useful. Any projects you build outside of this is likely just for your own personal development or practice, which is fine if you're trying to explore new tools or sharpen your skills. But if your goal is to solve real problems or build a portfolio that gets hiring managers excited, then you probably want to follow one of these frameworks. So the first framework is for real users. So if you're working in a company or you're volunteering for one and you're building a solution for actual people like marketing, HR, finance, this is a framework that I use myself. So number one is plan. Number two is develop. And number three is analyze. Number one is plan. So before you touch Excel, Power BI, or any other data tool, you first need to ask, what pain point does the user have? What's slowing them down or causing them stress? Or what does success look like to them? What are we trying to do better? Or what are they trying to do better, faster or cheaper? You need to talk to them. Watch how they do their work. Ask them what's frustrating you the most or what makes you feel most uncomfortable about your day to day. Because once you have that context, you're going to be able to now have ideas. You can generate ideas in your head. And once you do, sketch the ideas on paper or on a whiteboard. So, me personally, I normally write a lot of my ideas. I'm just going to wipe my board very quickly. I write a lot of my ideas on a whiteboard like this. You can do something similar, whether that's a whiteboard, a piece of paper, or even a notebook that you can find online, like Notion or OneNote. Just find something to sketch your ideas on. So one of the things you want to ask yourself is, what should the final thing be? Should it be a dashboard? Should it be a tracker, a report, a pipeline? And what KPIs would help them and why? What data do we need to calculate those KPIs? What format does it need to be in so they can use it without friction? What decisions can this help them make? But you need to remember, you're not just building a dashboard. You're actually building something that can help them save time, money, human effort. And number two on our framework is develop. So that means build a solution with your new blueprint. So at this point, you would have actually created like a user requirements document and you would have sketched like a prototype of what the solution would look like. Once you have that, begin developing. So enter your data, connect to the right data sources, add your formulas, apply formatting, use the right charts, and then test it. Once you've tested it, you need to let your users test it as well. If they can't make real clear decisions from it, then it's not good enough yet. So get feedback from them and keep improving it until it clicks for them. And the final step is analyze. So you need to step back, zoom out, and then ask yourself, what patterns or outliers do we see? What story is the data trying to tell us? What actions should we take based on what we now know? If the users can answer these questions clearly, then your solution is on the right track. So now let's move on to the second framework. And this is for simulated users. Okay, let's say you don't have a company, you don't have any real users, and you're using data sets that you found online, like Kaggle or an API or scraping a website. That's actually fine. That's actually completely fine. What you need to do is you need to simulate the kind of problem a business would actually care about. So here's how I'll do it. First is explore. The second is define. And the third is develop. So it's quite similar to the first one, except we now have explore and define as the second. We're still keeping the third step, or we're still keeping the develop step. So the first step is explore. So this part, this is where you actually need to get to know what your data set is about, even if you've never seen it before. So open your data set, whether that's a CSV file, a JSON file, open it, and then ask yourself, what is this data set about? What does each field contain? Are there any gaps? Are there duplicates? Are there weird patterns? Which metrics look the most interesting? What feels like it could be useful for a business? What feels like it could be useful to a business somewhere? No matter how small you think it is, write everything down because that's going to build understanding and you'll begin to spot problems or potential problems and even opportunities early. The next step is define. So now you need to define a problem. You need to ask questions a real business would ask. What would someone in marketing, operations, or HR want to know about this? What kind of question would they ask from this data? What real problem could this help them solve? For example, if I worked in Uber Eats, could I use this data to find out which cities had the slowest delivery times? Could I also find out what time of day it happens? Or if I worked in HR, could I use this data to spot which departments have the most employees leaving and why? Or if I was building a customer service dashboard, could I flag the complaints that we received the most or the longest call durations so that we can act on them quickly? The thing is, if you're stuck with asking good questions, what you need to do is you need to find out what people complain about online the most. You also need to look at gaps and patterns or weird patterns in the data set and dig at them further. So if you notice anything unusual in the data set, just explore, dig into it. Let your curiosity guide you. You can even find out which KPIs are often tracked in a dashboard. So things like cost or churn. And then finally, you need to design and develop the solution. So you need to make it feel like it's something that you can actually hand over to a manager or team, something they'll be able to use easily. So you want to make the experience as frictionless as possible. You don't want them struggling to use your solution, whether that's a dashboard or spreadsheet, tracker, no matter what it is. Once you're done, you can even write a one-page summary at the top of your workbook, let's say, and you can talk about what your report or dashboard is actually about. So maybe at the top somewhere, you can say, this dashboard helps marketing teams understand how many leads they're generating from this campaign. And this is going to help them do this or do that. So that's what makes it easy for the teams to use. So whichever framework you choose, it's still the same thing. You're going to take data, you're going to turn it into a solution, and then you're going to help someone make a decision easier or faster. Let's dive into today's project. So let's imagine that you've joined a company and your manager asks you, hey, listen, we're spending over our budget this quarter, and I need to know which departments are overspending. And I also want to know what we can do about it. So now you're tasked with building an expense report in Excel to help them spot who's overspending, see where the money's going, and make smarter budgeting decisions. So basically, you're going to track how each department is spending their budgets, and you're going to flag anything that exceeds that budget. Because this is under the category of real users, we're going to use the first framework that I went through, which is plan, develop, analyze. So step one is plan, and this is more of the thinking phase. Okay, so we're not touching Excel yet. We're just trying to understand the problem a little more, and then we can now sketch what the solution could look like. So one thing I like to do is I like to create documents and I like to record all the requirements of the project. Okay, so for us, we're going to record the details. I'll tell you what, let's open up we'll open up a page. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a document. I'll create a document. I'll show you guys what the process looks like. Okay, so let's call this user requirements doc. We'll say expense report or do it like this. Expense report, user requirements doc. Okay, so I'm just going to, so we're going to start with the objective and I'm just going to add a header for objective. And the objective of our assignment is to create an expense report that, okay, that spots departments, spot departments that overspend, let's say. Then we also want to track the movements each department's expenses, and we also want to make budget decisions. Also make smarter budget decisions, should we say? Okay, so we can do that. So we'll start with the objective, and then we can now talk about like things about the user, the problems or the problem we're trying to solve. So let's actually list the problem, or rather, let's do it like this for now. And guys, you don't have to follow this format strictly. You don't have to do that. I'm just doing it for the sake of the video. In a real project, it's probably going to be a bit more detailed than this because you're dealing with a lot of moving parts. But for the sake of this lesson, we're just going to go through high level, simplified version of this. So what I want to do is on the first, okay, let's first define who the user is, right? So who's the user? And for now, we can say the manager because it's the manager that basically approached us with this assignment. Okay, so yeah, the manager. And also, guys, you don't have to. So what I'm doing, right? I'm using Notion. Notion is the tool I'm using to record these notes. Like I said before, you can use any note-taking tool of your choice. It's completely up to you. But the principles still remain the same. You just have to be clear about what problem you're solving. And once you have that clarity, then it's going to be easy for you to now build a solution that's valuable to your end users. So once again, who's the user? And the answer is our manager, because who's going to use this report or who's going to use the data solution we're building? And the answer in this case is our manager. Now, let's also ask, what should we ask? We want to ask the right questions as well. You don't want to just ask anything. So let's deal with the problem. So what are they struggling with? What are they struggling with? And one of the things that the manager has made clear to us is they haven't got a clear view on who is spending what. So let's write that down. They haven't got a clear view on who's spending what, right? So we can now create a solution directly tied to that. And they only notice problems after the money has already been spent. So yeah, um, let's they only notice the problems once the money has been spent. That's problem number two. So they may, some can say there are overlaps between number one and number two, but it's always nice to just brain dump once you have the opportunity to do so. So look at this more like a mental exercise for gaining clarity over what the main problem is. I know I sound like a broken record right now, but this is the part most data professionals get wrong. They assume they understand what the solution is, but they end up building something that's not tied to a real business problem. So if you're able to get as much clarity as possible on what the business problem is, then you actually spend less development time building something the users can actually use. Another thing that they want to do is they want to catch issues early and stay within budget. So they want to catch issues early and stay within their budgets. We'll say within budget. So we've now asked ourselves, who's the user and what are they struggling with? So now what we want to do is we want to understand what success looks like to them. So let's write that down. What? So what does success look like to them? One thing about users, right? If you're going to talk to your users, one thing about them is that you're not, it's possible for you to get the answers from them, but don't assume whatever they tell you is what you must build straight away. There's a strong chance that they will tell you a problem that's actually a symptom of a bigger problem, right? For example, let's imagine that you create mobile phones and the user says, I want dark mode. And that's the complaint that you see the most, or that's the feature request you see the most. I want dark mode. What they're actually saying is that I use my phone at night and the light from the phone strains my eyes. So that's what they actually mean. They don't actually want dark mode, but they're just complaining about them using their phones in the middle of the night and the light from the phone is just straining their eyes. Perhaps you can introduce a feature that reduces how bright the phone is when they use it at night. You can add a night mode feature on the phone that automatically reduces the brightness maybe after 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. What I'm trying to say is this, right? Even though you may have conversations with your users, you still want to actually understand what the problem is that they're not telling you about. They may be telling you about the symptom, but they may not be telling you what the actual problem is. You just want to keep that in mind as well. Okay. But I digress. Let's go back to the main let's go back to the project. Okay. So what does success look like to them? What do they want? They do want to have a list of departments. So they want the department names and they want how much each department is spending. So let's say they want a table showing departments and their spendings. So they want that, but what else do they want? They do want a flag that automatically alerts them if someone's overspent. So in Excel, that will probably be something like conditional formatting. So let's say uh, a flag that, or let's say a way to flag overspending automatically. Okay. So so far, they want a table showing departments and their spending, and they want a way to flag overspending automatically. Okay, so we have two things in place. So I'm just thinking, what else would they want? What would make it easy for them to understand? They want they want a visual. Let's say a visual. So they're gonna want a visual that shows them where most of the money is going. A visual that helps them understand where most of the money is going. Now, what we need to ask ourselves is, what does the solution actually need to include? What are we actually going to build? How I like to start is I like to start with the table. We'll start with the table. Um, Let me just add that as well. So what will we build? So our table needs to include, so we need the names of each department. So we need the names of each department. We'll probably need to include what they're spending their budgets on as well, actually. So yeah, what they're spending their budgets on, and perhaps how much goes into each expense. Into each expense. So like something like categories, let's say. Category of each expense. So this will be amount. This will be department names. Actually, let me just correct that. This is how much goes into each expense. No, this will be its own thing. So the category of each expense. How much goes into each expense? Okay, let me just, I'll withhold that for now. So we need a flag to basically indicate when a department goes over their budget. So we need the flag to indicate departments, department say exceeds the budget or not. So these are the list of things that our table will probably need. If I think of anything else, then I'll add to it later. But for now, I think we're good with that. Okay. So let's now start thinking about the table itself. So what are the table names going to be? What's going to be included in each table? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go one by one and just figure out whether that should be a field or not. So the names of each department. So yeah, that will be depart. We'll call it department. So I'll call this field names. Department, what they're spending their budgets on, how much goes into each expense. I think there are overlaps. Okay, what I'm gonna do is let's even say the budget amounts. I think that's what we should say. The budget amounts. And that's gonna be budget expressed in dollars, let's say. What they're spending their budgets on is going to be the expense in dollars. How much goes into each expense? Maybe we should remove that. How much goes into each expense? I think this is pretty much the same as this one. So what I'm gonna do is let's get rid of that. Category of each expense. Yeah, it's gonna be category, let's say. And the flag to indicate when a department exceeds the budget or not. We'll call this budget status. Okay, so I've pretty much supplied the field names already. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is here's how I'm gonna position it, right? Department names will go first. And then let's say the category. The category is second. The expense will go third. Or should the budget go first? Third. Should the budget go third? Expense, because you would want to know how much was spent. And then you want to compare that to the budget. So, okay, we'll have the expenses third, the budget fourth, and then we'll have this one last. So let's do that. So category. Category. Expense in dollars. The budget in dollars. And the budget status. Okay, so in Notion, I can actually create a table. All I need to do is just hit /, then just type in table, then hit enter. So now I can now create just basically just a mock-up of what my table is going to look like in Excel. So I've already said department, and then we have category, and then we've got expense, and we're going to express that in dollars, and then we've got the budget. So what budget was assigned to each department in dollars, and then we've got budget status. So this is going to be our flag, right? So those are the header names. And then for the budget status in particular, because it's a flag, we can add conditional formatting. And it's going to highlight red if it exceeds our budget. And it's going to highlight green if we're on track, if the department is on track. We're going to include, let's say, we're going to include one visual for, we need to compare the expenses versus the actual budget. So, and that's going to be for each department, That sounds to me like a column chart. Yeah, it sounds like a clustered column chart, in fact, because we're including expenses against budget for each department. So there'll be 2 bars for each department. I'll show you what that looks like. And then we need to understand how the expenses are being spent. I did mention it earlier, but I took it off. So how are the expenses distributed? Expenses are distributed. We could use a pie chart, but for this example, we do have a lot of pieces. So we're going to use a tree map. So let's say 2 visuals. We'll also include 2 visuals. Let's do an ordered list. So that's number 1 and that's number 2. Okay, I think we are ready to start development. So that's the planning complete. So step one was planning. Now step two is going to be developing. So we're going to now develop our table and the visuals we've just mentioned. So I'm going to open up Excel, and this is a blank sheet. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the header names. So just like we did earlier. So department, then category, and then expenses in, I'll call it expense in dollars. So singular. The budget in dollars, expressed as dollars, and we've got the budget status. And that's going to be our flag. So let me just Control A, then Alt HOI, and that's going to auto fit those headers. Otherwise, if you notice, some of the headers are overlapping. So it's cropped some of the header names. So I'm just going to Control A, Alt HOI, and that's going to auto with that. So what I'm going to do, just for the purpose of this exercise, I'm going to actually paste the data that I've got. And then once I've done that, now I actually need to add a formula. Because we've got budget status column already, we now need to add the formula that basically looks at the expense and the budget and looks to see if this department has exceeded the budget allocated to them or that they're on track. So how am I going to do that? I'm going to use an if function. We're going to talk about if functions later on in the 30-day Excel challenge. There is a lesson dedicated to logical functions. So stay tuned for that. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the if function. And the first argument in my if function is the condition. So if this cell is greater than this cell. So if expenses is greater than budget, this is what I want you to return. I want you to return exceeds budget. Otherwise, return on track. So if I just hit enter, you're going to see that the marketing department have actually exceeded the budget. They spent more money on ads than the budget they were provided. So that's interesting. I'm just going to put this in bold. Or rather, I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm just going to copy the formatting for this to that. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to now drag this. In fact, I'm also going to show you guys the formula bar. So I'm going to go to view and then click on formula bar in case you can't see the formula. So now you can see it. So once again, the first condition, or rather the condition we're using is this one here. That's the first argument. And that I'm basically telling Excel, check to see if the expenses are greater than the budget. If the expenses are greater than the budget, return exceeds budget. Otherwise, return on track, which means that they're fine. They're actually spending within the threshold we've provided. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to drag the fill handle. So if you can't see it, it's a little square at the bottom right of the cell I'm currently in. I'm going to hold it and drag it all the way down until I reach here and then let go. And now the formula has actually been applied to all the cells below the first one I filled in. So now anybody that looks at this can tell which departments have exceeded their budgets and which ones are actually within their budgets. But the thing is, we want them to know faster. Otherwise, they still have to spend a few moments still reading through each of these cells. We want them to visually understand it without them having to think too much. So what we're going to do is we're going to use conditional formatting. And I'm actually going to select all of these cells we've just copied down. Okay. And then I'm going to go to home, the home tab, and then conditional formatting, and then highlight cell rules, and then equal to. And then here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to type exceeds budget. And any cell that has exceeded budget, I want it to be colored with light red field with dark red text. I'm going to click OK. And now you can actually see all the ones that have exceeded budget straight away. And if I want to do the same thing for on track, but with a different color, I follow a similar process. So I just repeat everything I've just done. And then go to home, conditional formatting, highlight cell rules. And then if you want to be cheeky, you can actually go to text that contains. So that's a bit different. And then you can type on track. And then you're going to click on green fill with dark green text. And then click OK. And there we have it. So now overspending stands out immediately in red. And everything on track is calm and it's in green. So let's create the visuals to help us spot patterns in our dataset. We're going to use the clustered column chart to compare each department's expenses versus budget. And we're going to do this side by side, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first select column A, column C, and column D because we need the department, the expense, and the budget columns. And then you're going to go to Insert tab, and then you're going to go to Insert column or bar chart. So click the drop down, and then you're going to go to Clustered column. And then let me just zoom out a little bit, and then just drag that. I'll drag it, let's say, here for a moment. So now I'm going to add the title. I'm going to say which. The thing is, you want to add a title that clearly describes what's going on in the graph. So which departments are over budget? And then let's add the X and Y axis. So you're going to go to add chart element and then axis titles. And then we're going to start with the X axis. So click on primary horizontal. And then I'm just going to name this departments. And then repeat the same process. So you go to add chart element, go to axis titles, and then primary vertical. And then this time, I'm just going to type amount. And this is expressed in dollars. And then I'm just going to click out. Let me see if I can just expand this a little bit. So if I just zoom out and then just drag that to the side, you can actually see the departments who have actually spent over. So now let's actually add the tree map as well. This is now going to help us show which categories take up most of the company's budget. So that means we're going to, if I just scroll to the left, we're going to need columns B and column C. And then, so select columns B and C, and then go to insert, and then go to insert hierarchy chart, and then click on tree map. And then I'm just going to drag this all the way to the bottom, just for some space. And then let's expand this a little bit. Yeah, that should be okay. Okay, and we now need to give it an appropriate title name, something that our end user is going to look at and they just understand, okay, this is what the chart's about. So let's say for now we'll use a question again. Where is our budget going? So where is our budget going? And if we want, we can actually click on one of the data labels and then just right click it and then click on format data labels. If you want, in terms of if you want to make it a bit more descriptive the moment someone looks at it, just click on value. That also adds a value amount to each of the expense categories. But that's completely your choice. You can actually untick it and you can actually hover your mouse over any of the tiles on the tree map. So you can also see the expense category and its corresponding value. But most importantly, you can actually see how much of each expense type contributes to the overall total cost. Thinking about it, we do know who's over budget, but it might be a good idea to also show by how much they're over budget too. So if someone's over budget by like $50, that's completely different from someone who's over budget by $5,000. The budget status, if we just look back at it, so this column, the budget status column, tells us what, but we need a new column that's also going to tell us how bad. So let's do that. So what I'm going to do is, let me just drag that, let's say all the way there. So we're going to create a new column and we're going to call this the difference in dollars. And then I'm just going to expand that a bit. And then in F2, I just do equals C2 minus D2. And then I'm just going to drag this all the way down. And then I'm just going to move that out of the way as well. So now, if someone's gone over budget, it's a positive number. If someone's gone under budget, it's a negative number. And if they've broken even, then it's simply zero. We can use conditional formatting for that too. So let me just, I'm going to highlight all the values. And then I'm going to go to conditional formatting, highlight cell rules, greater than. So if it's greater than zero, it's not good. So highlight that in red. And then if it's below zero, then that's good. So we can highlight that in green. And if it's neutral, then we'll just leave it as it is. So we'll just leave it as white. Let's figure out who's basically gone over budget the most. So I'm going to actually add the filter. So if you want to do that, you just do Control Shift L. And then I'm going to click on, let's say, largest to smallest. So these are all the individuals who have spent the most or who have gone over budget the most. Let's actually we'll create a visual as well, actually. So we shall create, let's do a horizontal bar chart. Let's see what that looks like. So first of all, let me just select, I'm going to select columns A and columns F, and then go to insert. And then I am going to use clustered bar. So let's click that. And then let me just put that there for a second. I think we should probably flip it the other way around. So let's do it from smallest to largest, just for the sake of this visual. And then I'm just going to drag this all the way to the bottom. Let's do it right here. I'm going to expand that a bit. Okay. You know what? I think what we probably need to do, this sheet is becoming too cluttered. We need to create a new sheet. Let's move all the visuals into another sheet. So I'm going to go to here. Let's name this expense dashboard. And then we can name this expense table. Right. I'm just going to cut it. So Control X, paste you right there. And then do the same for you. Control X, then just paste you right there. And then where's the other one? This one too. And then just paste you there. Probably should give this a better name. So how much has each department gone over budget by? So let's also, I'm just going to make this a bit more presentable. Expense dashboard. So I've typed that in. Let's actually expand the text. I think 48 should be fine. And then I'm just going to, let's merge and center. And then can we expand this a little bit? Perhaps we should do the same thing. Let's align this with that. Also align that with this. Expand that a bit. We want to make sure that it's easy for us to just scan across the different visuals and understand exactly what's going on at a quick glance. Now, I'm probably going to have to maybe let's expand this actually. Sometimes you just have to play around with things, guys. It doesn't have to be perfect the first time. You want to test things out. So as you can see, I'm sizing and resizing, which makes the most sense for now. Maybe. I think maybe we should move the tree map to the bottom and actually move that here. Could work. In the real world, what I would have done is I would have probably created a quick version and then send it out to the users and then ask them straight away what needs improving. How easy is it for you to use in your day job? For now, we're just going to work with what we have here. So yeah, I'm just going to expand that a little bit. Now it's not perfect, but we can work with it for now. So now this is step 3, and this is where we analyze our data or analyze the dashboard. First of all, what do we see? We need to actually step back and look back at what we've built. And it's now time to actually learn from it. So the first thing you want to ask yourself is, what catches your attention? What's the first thing you notice, right? So the first thing, if I'm zooming into, let's look at the first dashboard, or let's look at the first visual. The first thing I notice actually is that finance seems to have, they have a budget of about $7,000 and they've got expenses of $7,000, meaning they've broke even. So they're not actually exceeding the budget. That's what we consider on track. So that's good. We're happy with finance. So if we start scanning through the others, so if we look at HR, you can see that the orange bar, which represents budget, is longer than the blue bar, which represents expense, which means the expenses do not exceed the budget. And that also means they're on track. So we're happy with HR. And if you see here again, it's a similar case for a different category. So that's good. And the same with sales for one category. Customer success, we're happy with them. IT have broken even. So we're happy. Same with customer success. Again, legal is good. Now, operations, it's a different story. If you see, the expenses have exceeded the budget because the blue bar is longer than the orange bar. So is it by much? It's by about $100. So we may not be too concerned about that, but we may still need to review it. Now, sales, if you notice earlier, they actually, in one category, sales actually spent less than the budget they were allocated. But in this category, they're spending more than the budget they've been allocated. So, it may raise eyebrows, but because it's only one category that they've overspent, perhaps we're not too concerned about that. However, marketing have exceeded their budget, the same with IT in a department, the same with facilities. In fact, facilities have exceeded their budget twice. So that's interesting. We need to investigate that. We need to understand what's going on there. It could be a logistics issue. It could be something to do with equipment. Who knows? We'll probably need to launch a review and figure out what challenges lie there. Marketing. Now they've exceeded their budget too. By how much though? How much have they exceeded it by? In fact, we can actually look at the other visual to answer some of these questions. So legal, operations, and marketing have exceeded their budgets in at least one category. Facilities have done it in two categories, as you can see here. IT have exceeded in one category. Okay, marketing have actually exceeded their budget in two different categories. So that's interesting. Sales have done it by one, and operations, once again, so they've done it twice. Straight away, there are two departments who have exceeded their budgets in two different categories. That's operations and marketing. We'll probably need to keep a close eye on what's going on in both departments. Do we need to launch an investigation? Are there any challenges that we're not aware of? That's interesting. But let's still explore. The tree map may give us a bit of context into what the challenges may be. So straight away, we understand that the question for this one is, where is our budget going? And as you can see, the single largest category is payroll. It's the largest tile on there, and it has a value of $7,000. Equipment comes second, and consulting comes third. And we have auditing in the middle, ads in the middle, but we're spending the least amounts of money around events, support tools, training, recruitment, supplies, subscriptions, etc. We're now done with the insights. We've explored what's going on the dashboard. So we actually need to make decisions that respond to each of the insights we've uncovered. So based on what we know, we do need to focus on certain departments, some more than others. There are two departments that raise some concerns with how they're spending their budget. We need to look into these the most. And the first on my list is operations. They've exceeded their budgets for both the equipment and the logistics. So if we go back to to this one here. You can see operations here, and you can also see them here. So logistics and equipment is where they've exceeded their budgets. What actions should we take? I think first of all, what we need to do is we need to break down the logistics spend. So how much are we spending on logistics? Is it fuel costs, or could it be delay in deliveries, or are we using third-party carriers to help us out? Because it's equipment that's one of the offenders, we just need to check if the equipment was a one-off purchase, a one-off investment, or is it part of a recurring issue that may need like longer a longer term solution to fix. So we definitely need to look into that. But for now, this is the verdict. We're going to pause any further purchases on all logistics until this has been reviewed. The other department that I did notice was marketing. The blue bar in marketing is longer or it's taller than the orange one. And that simply means that the expenses have exceeded the budget. So the question to us is why? Bear in mind, it's actually done it twice. So you see it here, you can also see it here. Where is this going to? Where have they actually exceeded the budget? So marketing here and marketing here. So it's for events and ads. So even though if you look here, ads is here and events is actually here. So they're not necessarily the largest expenses. However, we gave marketing a budget and they have exceeded it. So we need to ask, where's the ROI in the ads and the events? We're going to need some ROI reports. They need to explain what the marketing money is being spent on. So which channels or campaigns delivered results and which ones didn't? And we need to evaluate the ones that had a poor turnover or poor turnout and the ones with weak engagements. Because if the values are not converting, then we simply just need to reallocate how much we're spending towards the different channels. And we need to reallocate them into the campaigns with the higher returns. For now, we're going to have to freeze spends on any campaigns that are low performing. And we need to reallocate to channels and activities that are delivering good ROI for us. So that's the recommendation for marketing based on the insights we've looked at. But also, I did actually notice facilities. So the thing is, facilities the only other department that exceeded its budget. So the interesting insight I noticed about facilities is that it's actually the only other department that's exceeded their budgets in two different expense categories. So not just once, it's exceeded its budget twice. If you look at the table right here, you're going to see it's mentioned twice. They've exceeded their budgets for supplies, and I believe that's maintenance. The reason why we're not too concerned about that is because they've actually not exceeded by a lot. So the action we're going to take for now is we're simply just going to monitor their spending closely next month. We'll look at how they're spending their budgets next month. And if there are any concerns, then we'll monitor them a bit more closely. But for now, we're not bothered. So we can also what we can do is we can add a buffer alert, right? And what that buffer alert is going to do is it's going to tell us when they reach 90% of their budget. And once we get that alert, that's when we now step in and see if everything is okay. If there's a business justification for it, then we're more than happy to expand the budget. Otherwise, we can look and just help them manage the cost in a way that makes sense to all parties involved. But so far, all the other teams, all the other departments, we're actually happy with them. So when you're talking about teams like HR, you're talking about other teams like you're talking about HR, you're talking about customer success, finance here. So these are good examples of departments who are actually spending within the threshold we've supplied. So that's good. That's good. In other words, no action taken. They just need to keep it up. So what they can do actually, they can document some of the practices that they're applying to allow them to spend within the budget. And they can share the knowledge between the other teams. That way, everybody's learning together, everyone's trading, interesting practices that help them out. What I think you can also do, you can actually create a table that summarizes all the points we ran through, and then you can send it to all the key stakeholders who will find this valuable in your company. And that way they can stay on top of all the things you ran through. It can be a simple table like let me just open this. It can be a simple table like this. And basically, you can add conditional formatting that will make it much more easy to understand. So for instance, let me just highlight all this and then go to conditional formatting, highlight cell rules, and you can say text that contains high. If it's high, fill with red. So color each one red. And then if it's medium, go to highlight cell rules, text that contains medium. Then you can click, let's even say custom format, perhaps orange. Then hit OK. And then if it's low, then conditional formatting equal to type low. Then we can say yellow. Say yellow for that. Click OK. And if it's none, you can either leave it neutral, you can leave it white, or you can say none, and then we fill it with green. So we'll call this, what should we call this? Let's call it summary table, right? So you have the department name. Did they overspend? Yes. Is there action needed? Yes. Or you can say like monitoring. You can say yes, review. So the choice is yours, but you can leave that there. Find out if your end users find it useful. If they do, then you can pretty much create summary tables to support some of the analysis that you've done. Otherwise, just delete it. But if you do want to have a look, I'm going to save this and I'm going to give you access to it. So if you want to have a look at it, go to the GitHub link in the description of this video and it's all yours. So what have we done? We've covered two frameworks for building data projects. So the first one is plan, develop, analyze. And that's for building projects that have real people involved. So if you're actually building a dashboard, a spreadsheet, and you are actually going to give it to another team or you're going to give it to another person, then the first framework is tailored for that. And the second framework is for building using public data. So data from the internet, from the web, whether that's an API, you're scraping from a website, or you found a zip file with several Parquet files. Whatever that is, basically, you want to use the explore, define, develop framework. And that will help you understand exactly what data you're working with and pick out the useful metrics from there and even prepare you for some data cleaning steps and then create those awesome insights that your users can enjoy. So in a nutshell, use the first one if you're dealing with real users and use the second one if you want to build a data project that serves simulated users. But the key thing is you're not actually going to get good by just watching the video. You're only going to get good if you practice. So don't find yourself passively watching this, you know? If you want to cement the things we've gone through, you have to do it yourself. And that brings our first practice day to a close.